Am I the asshole for picking a fight and telling my dad to grow up over a used pad? Disclaimer, this is not my story. My 12-year-old sister got her first period a few days ago. It was rather stressful for her since her whole life she lived in a house with no women. With the help of a few female friends, I ended up getting her all the stuff she needed, and a few friends taught her what she needs to know. It was a rough start with a lot of cleaning, but she got in the hang of it. My dad didn't help much. In fact, I don't think he even knew she got her period before today when he saw a used pad in the bathroom trash. I heard him complaining about it to my sister and I stepped in. I was already irritated as about 20 minutes before that me and my dad got into a light argument. He was saying she shouldn't just be laying those things around. Part 2 is up. Part 2. Am I the asshole for picking a fight and telling my dad to grow up over a pad? Disclaimer, this is not my story. He was saying she shouldn't just be laying those things around and didn't want to see bloody products in his bathroom. I told him that it wasn't a big deal. It was one pad with some toilet paper on top of it. If it bothered him so much, all he had to do was take some more toilet paper and shove it down. That's when the argument got worse, and we both was borderline yelling at each other. When I said, "This whole thing is stupid, it's just a little bit of effing blood. It was in a trash can and mostly covered. Grow the hell up." He bit back saying it's not immature for him not wanting to see my sister bloodstained pass around his space as well. That is gross and isn't his problem, though he shouldn't have to see it. Ooh. Am I the asshole for reporting my sister for child abandonment? I'm a 32-year-old woman, my sister's 34, and her husband have 3 children. So she's not a single mother and not struggling financially. Yet she insists I watch her kids because you never see them. Come on, be a good aunt. She and her husband can afford a babysitter, but just prefer to leave the kids with relatives. The other day, she came to my house and told me to let the kids come in at the house and told me to let the kids come in as she had errands to run. I did what I usually do and told her to get lost, and that usually works, but this time she decided to leave the kids on my porch and drove away. I immediately called my county version of CPS and reported it as a case of child abandonment. Long story short, the kids were taken into protective custody. My sister and her husband had to get a lawyer and go through a mountain of procedures to get them back. I thought what I did was well deserved, but my mom has been on my case telling me I was cruel. I believe I did what any law-abiding citizen should do, but what do you think? Am I the asshole? I don't know. I personally wouldn't do that to my sister, but if it's happening over and over again, maybe y'all need to have a little talk. But if y'all want me to do more story times like this, just let me know. So yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed this hairstyle. But yeah, just leave a comment. Is she the asshole or is she not the asshole?
Imagine your parents leaving you with someone they thought they could trust, only for you to end up being tortured by the entire neighborhood. In July of 1965, Sylvia Likens, 16, and her younger sister Jenny, 15, were sent to live with a woman named Gertrude Beniszewski. Sylvia's parents were in desperate need of money and joined a traveling carnival. They promised Beniszewski $20 per week to take the girls in. Beniszewski already had 7 children of her own, so what's 2 more? Little did Sylvia's parents know this would be the last time they'd see their daughter alive. At first, the payments were on time and Sylvia and Jenny fit right in. Jenny had polio and wore a leg brace, so Sylvia did the chores for both of them and took care of her. The problems began when the payments for their room and board was late. Gertrude started beating the girls with paddles. One day in August, the girls were beaten 15 times because Gertrude's oldest daughter told her that the girls had overeaten that day. The abuse quickly escalated and poor young Sylvia became the focus of Gertrude's wrath. It's thought that Gertrude, who was 36 at the time, and her eldest daughter Paula were jealous of Sylvia's looks. Gertrude would starve Sylvia, followed by force feeding her until she'd vomit, then force her to eat the regurgitated contents. She once struck Sylvia so hard across the face that she broke her wrist, and then when the cast dried, she used it as a weapon. Slowly, Gertrude got her children to join in on the horrific abuse, followed by the neighborhood children. She encouraged them to use Sylvia as a dummy and practice martial arts on her. As more children joined in, Gertrude gained popularity and the violence became more extreme. At one point, she forced Sylvia to strip and use a glass bottle on herself in the middle of the living room for the neighborhood boys to watch. By the end of summer, Sylvia was forbidden from attending school and held captive at home. Because of the continuous cruelty, Sylvia had become incontinent. This angered Gertrude and she had Sylvia tied up naked in the basement on October 6th. Poor Sylvia was then subject to burns, beatings, verbal and physical sexual assault, and etc. She was also given very little to eat and forced to wet herself and use dark corners of the basement as a toilet. Word spread in the neighborhood amongst the children and they would pay 5 cents apiece to come and see Sylvia for themselves. The broken, scarred, and burned body of a teenager was a sight to behold for a curious child. Neighbors would later recount hearing screaming coming from the house until 3 in the morning at times, but in those days, no one wanted to intrude on others' household affairs, so no one came forward. Even Sylvia's older sister, who was told twice by her and Jenny about the abuse, thought that the sisters were exaggerating and did nothing about it. It seemed like everyone was turning a blind eye. However, for Sylvia, the horror kept escalating. Crime Fanatic Friday Part 2, the girl tortured by an entire neighborhood. After holding 16-year-old Sylvia Likens captive in the basement, Gertrude Benezuski's heinous acts continued at a greater rate. Gertrude, her 7 children, and the neighborhood kids would help Gertrude restrain Sylvia as she received scalding hot baths and cuts, where Gertrude would rub salt into her wounds and sores. On October 23rd, they burned in her stomach with a hot needle, saying, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." Once finished, Gertrude's 10-year-old daughter tried to brand Sylvia's left breast with a heated bolt that had an S on it. Sylvia knew that she was dying and even told her younger sister that she didn't have long to live. She tried to escape on October 25th but was caught by Gertrude before she made it to the door. The final day of Sylvia's life was different than the previous months. She was delirious and couldn't speak. She was fully incontinent, and Gertrude's 12-year-old boy hosed her down with cold water while laughing at her. Even in her weakened state, she made one final attempt at escaping before Gertrude caught her at the basement door and stomped on her head. In her last hours, she was given a warm bubble bath, changed into clean clothes, and laid on the mattress. She closed her eyes and never opened them again. Days earlier, Gertrude forced Sylvia to write a letter claiming that she had run away and the boys from the neighborhood were her torturers. Her last attempt at deflecting any blame was to cover Sylvia's body in rubbing alcohol. When police arrived, Gertrude told them that Sylvia had returned home in her bloody and dying state and that she had been trying to nurse her. Everyone was questioned, but no one was talking. No one except Sylvia's 15-year-old sister, Jenny. She told police, "You get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." Gertrude, 5 of her children, and 5 of the neighborhood kids were all arrested for Sylvia's murder. Her autopsy showed 150 wounds, some down to the bone, and she had also bitten through her lips when she died, almost detaching it from her face. Gertrude and her eldest daughter Paula were sentenced to life in prison. However, both of them were released on parole later on. They both changed their names and went on to lead new lives, but Gertrude died in 1990 of lung cancer. Jenny, Sylvia's sister, went on to marry and have 2 children of her own. She spent years on medication due to anxiety from watching her sister's torture and murder. 2 movies have been made based on Sylvia Likens' story, one called An American Crime and the other called The Girl Next Door. That's actually how I heard about this case. Both movies are heartbreaking though, so please take caution when watching. Because of this case, if anyone sees any type of child abuse in the state of Indiana, they are required by law to report it. Imagine your father asking you to help him install his cellar door only to be locked inside by him for the next 24 years of your life. Elizabeth Fritzl was freshly 18 and ready to leave the nest when one day in 1984, her father, Joseph Fritzl, asked her to help him install the door in the basement of their home in Austria. Unaware of his horrific intentions, Elizabeth obliged. As they finished and she was heading out, he suddenly covered her face in a cloth soaked in ether. For the next 24 years, Elizabeth had to endure suffering that no one could fathom. Joseph convinced his wife, other children, and their neighbors that Elizabeth ran away and joined some religious cult. They believed it because she had previously run away and stayed with a friend for 20 days when she was 15 to get away from her father's abuse, which started when she was 11. Police found her after those 20 days and brought her back home. If it wasn't terrible enough being forced to endure the blazing summers and catching rats with her bare hands, she was also repeatedly abused by her own father over the years of captivity. Initially, he tied her up with an iron chain so that she could barely move, but it caused trouble during the horrendous activities he put her through, and he removed it months later. For the first 5 years in the basement, she was all alone. He assaulted her at least 3,000 times in those 24 years, which resulted in her birthing 7 children. She gave birth to all her children with no medical help for almost 12 years. Joseph provided her with just a disinfectant, a dirty pair of scissors, and a book on childbirth. One of her children died prematurely due to difficulty breathing just 3 days after his birth in 1996. When the baby started to come, Elizabeth tried to end it all, but looking at her kids, she had purpose to live after the initial years of being alone. Joseph held control over her by threatening to end the lives of her and her children if they ever tried to escape. He would also turn off the lights in the basement for days on end so that she'd be in complete darkness. 3 of her children were in the basement with her, while the other 3 mysteriously appeared on the doorstep of Joseph and Rosemary, Elizabeth's mother, as per his planning. He doctored letters to Rosemary from Elizabeth stating that she was well but couldn't take care of the children. One day, Elizabeth's oldest daughter, Kirsten, who was 19 at the time, became extremely ill and needed immediate hospitalization. This is when Elizabeth pleaded with her father to get Kirsten medical attention. Joseph Fritzl, who had never shown mercy in those 24 years, surprisingly took Kirsten to the hospital. This is when things took a turn. Part 2. I faked being asleep all night to see if my wife was lying. My wife has been Baker acted. She didn't hurt herself, just said something concerning in public. I got a call from the hospital this morning asking me to head over for some family therapy. Apparently, she finally wanted to talk. I'll be honest, I'm pretty pissed at the reason why she's been so hateful towards my cats. It's absolutely asinine. It's nothing that anyone had suggested. She's not cheating. She's not sick physically or mentally. She's not bored of the relationship and looking for an out. According to her, one of the cats stepped on her laptop and ruined a story that she was writing. She's hated both cats ever since. I mean, that sucks, but it's not worth trying to emotionally blackmail me into getting rid of them. I asked her why she didn't just tell me the truth and why she'd been lying and refused to talk about it when I asked. Her answer was, because you wouldn't have gotten rid of them otherwise, and explained that when she saw I wasn't willing to abandon them for her, she took offense and made it a goal to have me pick her over them. Sickening. Don't know why she actually admitted to it all. The woman with us asked me how I felt about it all, and I just told the truth. I told her it was a nice run, but I'm probably going to want a divorce. I was asked why, and I told them. I've seen a new, hateful, malicious side of her that I want nothing to do with. She was so set on getting rid of the cats over a fan fiction being ruined that she manipulated her husband. My wife started shouting at me that I've betrayed her and that I'm scum for choosing animals over her. At least cats don't give ultimatums like she gave. It sucks that she's been Baker acted and all, I guess, but it's for the best right now. She'll have time to process it all in a safe environment and hopefully come to terms with it. Bad husband, I know. I'm almost sure that I'm going for a divorce. I'm very worried about having her in the same house with my cats. I want my cats safe. I don't want to worry about them being harmed or disappearing. Screw that. Part 2, I laughed in my husband's face when he asked to avoid the prenup. I called into work and took a week off. I'm an independent contractor, so I didn't sign any new contracts. I sat my husband down and suggested that we should see a therapist. He refused. I asked him why he wanted to avoid the prenup. He said because he wanted to combine finances. So I asked to see his bank accounts, and he had been misusing his money and was virtually broke. He basically had less than half of what I spent on my Audi. He had also made a series of bad investments and had apparently sold his property that he owned at NE. But most of his money went to his gambling habit. I knew he gambled, but not at the rate that I saw. I asked where we went from here if he didn't want to go to marriage counseling. He replied that since I made more, he should quit his job and follow his dreams. He wants to be a professional gambler? Is that a thing? I don't know whose money he thinks he's going to use to finance that. I asked him who would support him while he was following his dreams. Since he hadn't supported me, I would also not be supportive. My parents helped me out with the bills while I was in grad school. He flipped out and said that I was lucky to have him and that he should have dumped me for a younger woman. I replied that I should have dumped him for a younger man. I know it was childish, but I couldn't help it. He also said that it was unnatural for me to be making more than he was and that we should have at least 3 kids by now. I confessed that I also lost my shit and told him that the only younger women who would date him were the drunk or desperate ones because he had crazy written all over him. After the whole fiasco, I packed my bags, went to some friend's house, got the number for a good divorce attorney from a friend, and I will meet with him this week and hopefully start the process. I texted my soon-to-be ex that I was filing. His response? He was never going to sign the divorce papers and I was stuck with him whether I liked it or not. Honestly, everything happened so fast that I'm still in shock. I don't even know if I overreacted by talking about divorce so fast. So there's the update. I'm not sure what comes next, but thanks for everything. I'm 25 and my husband 42 have 3 children, a 2-year-old son and a set of twin girls who are 3 months old. We live just down the road from my parents. I have 4 older siblings that all went to college, but I didn't. I'm the only one with kids. All of my family got together for Christmas last year. Whenever I try to engage in a conversation with my family, they seem to just ignore me. My relatives would hold our babies but not talk to me much beyond that. I was so alone. I was late in my first pregnancy when we got married. A few of my siblings had gotten married before I did and they all had very nice weddings with lots of guests. No one had any interest in coming to mine. We trashed the idea of a wedding and got married at the courthouse. I couldn't even get all of my siblings to attend the little ceremony. We couldn't go on a honeymoon at the time, so I was even more miserable. Recently, my sister told me that our family thinks that I'm just a dumb bimbo with no goals in life, so I have babies instead. She says that's why no one values my input or opinion. They think I'm stupid for having children young. My children were not planned. They also think that I'm stupid for being with a man older than me, but he's my one true love. They don't want me to have any influence over large family decisions because they think that I'm dumb. They ignore me and don't make time for me. How do I get them to take me seriously? I'm 43 and have a 22-year-old daughter. All my daughter's life, she struggled with mental health issues. She has ADHD, bipolar, and borderline personality disorder. If I'm being honest, I never really understood a lot of my daughter's disorders. I've always approached mental illness as something you just bury deep down. And as a single mother, I've tried to do my best, but I know that I'm not perfect. Well, recently, my daughter asked if I go to one of her therapy sessions with her, and I only agreed to it because she seemed super excited about it. When we got there, her therapist first asked me how I was raised to think about mental health. I said I wasn't raised to think about mental health at all. She then said that she guessed that. It seemed kind of snarky, but I ignored it. She then asked about my family's history with addiction and mental issues. I denied any, and then she started to list all the things that my daughter told her and asked if they were a lie. They weren't a lie, but I never saw any of these things as big issues. She then began to explain to me BPD is a trauma response. She explained it can be caused by many things, but by me invalidating her emotions so much like I was invalidating my own had a part to play in it. She then tried to tell me ways that I can cope with my own trauma so that I can help my daughter cope with hers. After listening to her spew absolute garbage for 30 minutes, I finally got up and told her that she was a fucking quack and didn't know anything that she was talking about. I just stormed out and left. My daughter called me crying an hour later and I told her that she needed to get an actual therapist instead of that bitch. I wasn't upset with my daughter, but I did feel like she kind of threw me to the wolves. After cooling down though, I think maybe I could have handled that wrong, but I'm not sure.